let's summarize what we've seen from our two basic investigations into the effect of media on extent of refraction. So we first investigated what happens when light moves from an optically less dense to an optically denser medium, and we change how dense that receiving medium, that refracting medium is. In all cases where light moves from an optically less dense to an optically denser medium, the light is refracted towards the normal. And we saw that the more dense that refracting medium is, the more the light is refracted, the greater the bending. And then we investigated what happens when you control the density of the receiving medium, but you change the density of the incident medium. Now light moves from an optically denser to an optically less dense medium, and we change how dense that incident medium is. And we see how that affects the extent of refraction. In all such cases, the light is refracted away from the normal as it moves from the optically denser to the optically less dense medium. And we saw that as we increase the optical density of that incident medium, that causes a greater degree of bending, a greater extent of refraction. So what is the general finding? How can we summarize both of these two findings in one statement? The thing that determines how much bending happens is the difference between the two media. The greater the difference between the incident and the refracting medium, the more bending happens. It doesn't matter whether it's the incident or the refracting medium that is the more optically dense. The trend is still the same, that the greater the difference in optical density between the media, the greater the refraction that happens. To help us to understand this, let us think about this trolley moving between media at an angle. So first of all, let's think about the trolley traveling from tar, which is an easy medium, onto gravel, which is a difficult medium. Must be at an angle so that one of the front wheels hits the boundary between the media before the other. And in this case, as it moves from the easier to the more difficult medium, that wheel that hits the boundary first is slowed down before the other wheel gets slowed down. So the other wheel for some time travels faster, bending the course that the trolley is taking. And whenever something moves from an easier medium to a more difficult one, the course bends towards the normal. Now, how will that bending differ if the medium into which it goes is even more difficult? It's now not gravel, it's stones. In other words, how will the degree of bending differ now as a result of there being a greater difference in ease between the two media? Can you see that now you still get the same effect, that the wheel that strikes the boundary first is slowed down before the other wheel, but it's slowed down more than in the case of the gravel. And so the bending effect will be greater than in the case of the gravel. And so the path that the trolley takes will be bent even closer towards the normal. The greater the difference between the two media, the greater the bending that occurs. So those analogies were similar to the light moving from the easy medium to the more difficult medium. Like tar for a trolley is easier, air for light is easier, gravel for a trolley is more difficult, water or glass for light is more difficult. And in such cases, the light bends towards the normal. And just like with the trolley, the greater the difference in ease of motion between the media, the more the bending. Here the same. The greater the difference in optical density between the two media, the more the bending. So in this case where medium 2 is much more optically dense than medium 1, the bending is greater than in this case where the two media are more similar. How about if the trolley moves from a more difficult to an easier medium, from gravel to tar, for example? Again, it must be at an angle, so that one wheel reaches the boundary between the media before the other. So now, the wheel that meets the boundary first speeds up before the other wheel can speed up. So for a period of time, this wheel travels slower than that wheel, and that bends the direction of motion. Which way does it bend it? It bends it away from the normal. Now how about, instead of having gravel and tar, we have stones and tar? Stones being even more difficult to drive over than gravel. We'll get the same effect, but just enhanced. Because again, you have this wheel meeting the boundary before that wheel. And so this wheel speeds up, while this wheel wheel is still going slowly. But the difference is just that this wheel is going much slower than that wheel. More so than in the case of the gravel tar situation, causing the bending to be even more pronounced. And so in such a case, the refraction would be even further from the normal. And we find a similar principle in refraction of light. So just as the trolley was moving from a difficult to an easier medium, from the gravel or stones to the tar, here we have the light moving from an optically denser, a more difficult medium, into an easier medium. And as a result, we get refraction away from the normal. But the greater the difference in optical density between the two media, the more pronounced is that bending effect. So it's the relative optical density between the incident and refractive media that determines the extent of refraction that happens. And that is basically what Snell's law is saying.